What?
Facebook, Geneva Sands here with ABC News. I am here with Ralph Clark, the CEO of ShotSpotter. And ABC's justice team, led by Pierre Thomas and Nightline, teamed up with ShotSpotter during our cataloging of 11 days of violence in America this summer. We're here talking to Ralph Clark about what ShotSpotter does across the country, how their technology works, and let's just kick it off to you. What is ShotSpotter?
Well, ShotSpotter is an acoustic surveillance technology that detects, locates, and alerts on gunfire. And the way we do that is through incorporating sensors, network sensors, that when a gun is fired, those sensors are able to detect that particular gunfire event, and they can triangulate the exact location of that gunfire event in real time.
And you're in nearly 100 cities throughout the U.S.?
90 plus cities, yes.
90 plus cities. And what are some of those places that you're in?
Oh, gee. So we're in several cities in California, which is where we're based. We're headquartered in California. So Oakland, San Francisco, Richmond, California, Stockton, Sacramento, Fresno, I'm sorry, soon to be Bakersfield, hopefully. We're also in New York City, Miami Gardens, Rocky Mount, North Carolina, Wilmington, Delaware. We're in a number of cities. The thing quite interesting about our deployments is they're just not big cities that you would typically expect, but they're also very small cities and medium-sized cities as well. These are cities that are all struggling with the issue of gun violence.
And Facebook, please, if you have questions throughout our interview, put them in the comments section and we will try and get to them. Thank you. So, how do you deploy the technology? How do you work with police departments and
Sure, so
go
great
into
question.
these cities?
So the first thing we do is we try to define a coverage area that the city's interested in developing a comprehensive gun violence abatement strategy around, and we'll take their gun crime data and we'll draw a configuration or a circle around that area that's typically 3 square miles or more. And once we do that, we have an agreed to coverage area. We design a sensor array, which typically involves 15 to 20 sensors per square mile. And we design these sensors in a way to spread them out such that when a gun's fired at any location in our circle, that 3 or more sensors can detect that boom or bang sound and triangulate to do the detection, location, and alerting of that particular event. We then go about the very difficult work of getting permissions from various property owners and the like. Some of them are local, state and local government entities that we get permissions from. Sometimes we'll put them on light poles. Mostly we try to put them on top of tall buildings. We don't require line of sight, so we can literally sit in the middle of a rooftop. Once we have those sensors deployed, and these sensors are basically designed to ignore ambient noise, but they have a lot of intelligence around being able to recognize an impulse of noise. And when they hear that impulse of noise, they'll timestamp it. And then that timestamp is then communicated to software, which then collects a bunch of timestamps from multiple sensors and do the triangulation work, which we call intersecting hyperbole lines. And that's all accomplished within 15, 20 seconds. The system then will go through a classification process to rule out things that aren't gunfire from a machine point of view, and then we'll actually have trained acoustic experts that listen to these events to make the final determination if it's a gunshot or not before pushing that alert out to the agency. And this is all done within 30 to 45 seconds of a gun being fired. And it'll show up something like this dot on a map.
And just taking a step back, what brought you to start this company? What need did you see out there?
Well, the company was founded 20 years ago by a brilliant scientist by the name of Dr. Bob Schoen, who's still with us today and solving other problems beyond urban gunfire. In fact, he's working on a really interesting project trying to save the coral reef from blast fishing. And he had the idea that he could take network sensors and be able to detect and triangulate gunfire. And he set about doing that. His first city where he deployed the technology is Redwood City, which was a local community in Silicon Valley that was experiencing gun violence problems. And they're actually still with us today. I joined the company about 5 years ago. I was born and raised in Oakland, California, so I was very familiar with the issues and struggles around gun violence. And when I came upon the technology, I just thought it was such a brilliant idea. A lot of intellectual property, and the science around it was just very cool. I'm a technologist, an entrepreneur. But what I found in joining the company, that much more of the interesting work is the consulting work that we're doing with agencies to help them develop strategies to address gun violence, to deter gun violence, prevent gun violence. The technology is very, very cool, but it's really how it's used is what makes a difference. And so we're trying to change the world and make it a better place.
And when we spoke in Camden, which is one of the cities that uses the technology and has found it very useful.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about that most Americans just don't understand the level of gun violence in this country.
Yeah, sadly that's true. I mean, gun violence is probably one of the most underreported issues, criminal activities that go on in underserved communities, oftentimes underserved communities of color. We know that guns can be fired as frequently as 500 to 1,000 gunshot incidents per square mile per year, just to give you a sense. That's like an average of anywhere from 1.5 to 3 incidents per day. And full 80 to 90% of the time, people don't call 911 when they hear gunshots, and even when they do, they don't have a precise location to send officers to. So sadly, the result is violence becomes normalized, right? Guns are fired all the time. People don't call the police. Police don't respond. It's just expected. And in the process of that happening, there develops a lot of mistrust between communities and police, because communities say, hey, they don't care, they're not responding. Well, they don't have a tool to respond. And so what our technology does in a very brilliant way is we change that whole equation. We completely automate the detection, location, and alerting of gunfire. And that's really quite brilliant. And then what an agency can do with that information once they receive it is where the challenging change is happening. I guess we're getting a gunfire incident right now at 11:41. Can we pull this one up really quickly? Is this? I know this is off script a little bit, but this is cool.
This is showing us exactly how it works in real time.
Yeah. So this is
Ship that's coming from the alert screen. Yeah.
okay. Can we pop and view that incident?
Yes.
So this,
There you go.
the
It's
connect-
shipped to the other screen.
Oh, so now we're going to shift over here.
So this would be something that would be in the police department. They would have
Absolutely.
this technology there, and they would see what was going on.
So you heard that little that sound, that audible sound, say, hey, there's an alert coming in. The little toaster popped up. We clicked on it, and then up comes a map view with a dot on it. This has an address associated with it, and then metadata that's around the incident. So we have an exact time, the actual ID that it occurred at, what beat it's in, the exact lat long. And then what happens, this has already been reviewed by our Incident Review Center. So before the agency got it, it was listened to by an acoustic expert that determined, in this particular case, I think we're saying it's a possible gunshot. But let's listen to it just if we can for a second. Okay, single gunshot's a little bit tricky. I'm not even going to try to review it because every time I do it, I get it wrong. We have people that spend hours and hours and hours listening to thousands, 10,000 events, both gunfire events and things that aren't gunfire events, that basically train their ears to be able to detect a gunshot versus not a gunshot. And they also have other things that they're looking at as well to figure out if it's a gunshot. So the thing we know about fireworks is they tend to be omnidirectional in terms of how the sensors participate. Gunfire is typically directional. So when we look at the sensor participation, we'll see the directionality of sensors. So that combined with listening, and oftentimes, sadly, a lot of these events are multi-round events, so there's no mistaking a kind of 10-round event for a gunshot. So it's pretty cool.
We seem to have a question here on Facebook,
Okay,
so that's
great.
great. Issa's going to read it to us.
So Facebook is asking if fireworks would confuse the system.
Yeah, so we, over the years, have developed very sophisticated machine learning algorithms that can basically knock down fireworks, but they're not perfect. So we do have that second step in the process where a human will actually listen to the alert and make the final determination if it's a gunshot or not. That being said, I would say that there are certain times of the year that are very challenging for our company. We went through that. So July 4th, Cinco de Mayo in some places, and New Year's Eve. And July 4th is really tricky because it starts before July 4th and it continues after July 4th. And in that, there's a lot of firework activity that's kind of triggering the system. And then there's also, believe it or not, celebratory gunfire. And I hate that term because there's nothing celebratory about firing your gun up in the air and potentially hurting or killing someone in the end. But that's a challenging period for us. We do a lot of things to be able to kind of step up to that volume. We're not a perfect system by any means, but we're extremely good, I would say. And so hopefully that answers the Facebook viewer's question.
It seems like we might have one more question here.
So Facebook is wondering what steps you're taking to make it more widespread, ShotSpotter, like around the country, what cities?
That's a great question. So we changed our business model about 4 years ago. When I joined the company 5 years ago, I had the support of the board and the investors to change the business model to a managed services business model, effectively making the technology more affordable and also easier to acquire. So we offer it as a service now, as opposed to asking a police department to be in the systems integration business, that, you know, own and operate and maintain sensors. That's really not in their wheelhouse. So we kind of take on all that risk, if you will, offer this system or service or offer the technology as a service at an affordable price. Our work really begins after the system is deployed, working with the agencies to drive positive outcomes. The more positive outcomes that we can drive with agencies, the easier it is to get new agencies that kind of take a look at incorporating this technology. Because make no mistake about it, as affordable and easy to acquire the technology as it is, there's still risk involved with the agency in taking it on, because they become much more accountable to addressing gun violence. So a lot of our job has to be convincing them, showing them other agencies that have kind of taken that increased awareness and knowledge of gun violence, and they've been able to do something about it and drive reductions. At the end of the day, we're really about the prevention aspect of gun violence. We want to see year-over-year gun violence decline.
And do you have some examples of places where that's happened, where departments heard a shot, were able to react?
Sure.
Or get to a scene faster than they would have necessarily? I know we've heard some in DC recently.
Yeah, so I think, you know, that's an interesting question we always get. I think people, because they're informed by CSI, you know, Miami, where every crime gets solved in, 30 minutes or something like that, you know, they expect our system to be able to get police there to capture someone with a gun in their hands. That does happen. It doesn't happen all the time, and we're less interested in that and much more interested in providing higher levels of service to underserved communities and reduce and prevent gun violence. Now, that's not particularly sexy to a TV audience, certainly, because you're not capturing a criminal with a gun in their hands or maybe aiding the victim, although, again, that does happen. But really, it's the cumulative higher levels of response and trust that now community has in police departments, seeing them respond to these gunfire events that they hadn't been responding to before, that helps prevent gun violence in the future. And the way that helps prevent gun violence is the thing that the serial trigger puller fears the most. And we know that it's very few people that tend to drive gun crime in any community. So it's a solvable problem. So these are literally kind of tens of people. It's not thousands of people that are, serially using their guns on a, on a, time and time again basis. The thing that they fear the most is an engaged, collaborative, resilient community that rejects the normalization of gun violence. And that can only happen when police begin to respond in a much more precise and respectful way. And that's what our system is about. And we've seen where we've been deployed for over 2 years or more, we've seen a number of agencies been able to reduce their gun activations on a year-over-year basis by 35%. These are material reductions, frankly. Camden is a great example of that. Camden, New Jersey.
And Camden, they told us that they were their communities where people weren't calling 911 at all when they would hear gunfire, and now they were able to respond. And
yeah, it makes a world of difference. New Haven, Connecticut, great story up there, what they've been able to do. They're preventing gun violence. When they do get there on scene, they're able to interview witnesses. They're able to close when they are homicides or non-fatal shootings. They can close those cases much more effectively. So in Atlantic City is a great example. We've seen their case closure rate go up by 3x. That's phenomenal. But we don't want to take singular credit for any gun violence reductions. It's really our technology does a piece of it. Where we're most effective is those cities and agencies that have adopted a comprehensive approach to gun violence, of which we're a piece of that toolkit. And that's the way to think about it.
So we also have Walter Collier here, who's an engineer with ShotSpotter. We're going to turn over to him to learn a little bit more about how the technology works, how it's deployed, and what they see in the police, what the police departments see in their systems there.
Hi, Facebook, Geneva. So just to give you a basic description, or to pick up on what Ralph had said about ShotSpotter, it's a gunshot detection and location system that uses GPS-enabled microphone sensors to geolocate the detected gunfire. ShotSpotter basically has the front-end components, which are the sensors, which are deployed in the coverage area. After that, we have what we call a location server, which is the brains of the operation, so to say. The location server takes those, anything that goes bang, boom, or pop from the sensors, makes a determination whether it's likely gunfire or not. And then pass it along to our incident review center, which reviews the audio. Once they make a determination as actual gunfire, we then forward it to the customer on our user interface, which would either be the alerts console or our investigators portal. A little bit deeper into how the triangulation or the what we call multilateration works is a bang, boom, or pop is captured. Because we know the speed of sound and the location of each of our sensors, the sensors are taken in pairs, and a hyperbolic curve is drawn between those sensors. So if there are 4 detecting sensors, then each pair of sensors draws a line, and where that line where those hyperbolic curves intersect is where the dot is located. And
how fast is it from the time a shot would go off to the time the department would know about it?
as Ralph said, it's usually about 30 seconds. The system knows about it in milliseconds, processes it, and then it goes to the review process, which could take up to 30 seconds, even though the reality is we're much faster than that most of the time.
Thank you so much. And then, Ralph, I just wanted to bring you back in.
Oh, great, yeah. And I want to show you one thing here again. Maybe this is going a little bit off script here, but we now have the ability, these alerts can actually show up on mobile devices, including an Apple Watch.
So someone,
Yeah.
you could see it, someone who works for ShotSpotter could see it, or
An
potentially
agency
an
can see
agency
it.
can
Yeah.
see it out in the field while
Yeah,
they're out there.
absolutely, yeah. So we've traditionally deployed, we're certainly sending these alerts to 911 dispatch centers. We're sending them to patrol officers' cars frequently, which is typically a laptop. What we're really excited about in our next generation of a alert console is sending it to a mobile device and or a watch, either Android or iOS. And so we're seeing this kind of new generation of police officer that's kind of coming up, very technologically savvy. And we've all seen how people operate. I mean, the cell phones are basically an extension of someone's hand almost. Hopefully they're non-defensive hand. But this is another example of what it's looking like on
Android.
On Android.
And it's also on iPhone, Mac,
Yeah.
all the operating systems.
So we're continuing to invest in the technology. Our vision is to make this as available as possible to anybody that could use it to affect prevention of gun violence. Officers certainly that are patrolling in Cape Town, South Africa, it's very interesting. We just recently lit up a system there. They actually have the alerts going to their violence interrupters, right? So these are non-commissioned or non-sworn law enforcement agencies. In fact, they're former gangbangers in Cape Town, but because they know all the players in the districts, they're getting these alerts. And with that intelligence, they can almost anticipate an escalating war. So when, Walter shoots at me, they get that activation. They can almost know that I'm going to shoot back at Walter. So before I shoot back at Walter, they're coming to talk to me and say, hey, look, let's calm down, let's take a breather. This is exciting thing. It doesn't sound as exciting, again, as capturing someone with a gun in their hands, but we have to really be thinking about how we're changing the behavior of shooters to get them, to prevent them from shooting. That's really what we're about.
It's all about prevention.
It's all about prevention, absolutely, yeah.
And just to wrap up, I just want to ask you, what impact do you hope you have, and what have you seen gun violence in America here?
So again, we know that gun violence is significantly underreported. We've also developed insight that there's very few people driving this problem. We believe that gun violence reduction really has to take place on the ground with capacitated law enforcement with great tools like ours and great processes like ceasefire and the like, and a comprehensive strategy, doing the day in, day out work to combat the normalization of violence, engaging with communities, respecting communities, showing up, being present, and giving a deterrent, umbrella over these serial shooters. And if we can provide a safe space for communities to become much more resilient, we want to go well beyond 90 cities. Obviously, we think our work is, we're scratching the surface. I mean, we probably need to be in about 1,500 cities, so we've got a lot of work to do. That's what we're about, and we're just so grateful for the partnerships that we have with a number of our agencies that are really forward-leaning in on this. So we're not the inventors. When I say we have a consulting practice, our consulting practice is basically ripping off the content and best learnings from our most forward-leaning agencies and then regurgitating them out to the install base. So we're not the great, brilliant consultants in this thing, but we're able to see what's going on in these various cities, package it up together, see what works, and proffer that out to other places. And hopefully they're going to adopt it and make a material change in these underserved communities.
Ralph Clark, CEO of ShotSpotter, and Walter Collier, an engineer with ShotSpotter. Thank you for being
Great,
with us.
thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You bet.